Orleans Water Quality Advisory Panel. That's a mouthful to say. And on its behalf, I want to welcome you here tonight. The panel had decided that there was a forum in the afternoon sponsored by the Citizens Forum some weeks ago, but it would also be good to have one in the evening so folks that couldn't make an afternoon forum could make an evening forum. So welcome. A conceptual plan to meet water quality in Orleans, which is summarized in the flyer, which is on your seat as you came in. You can pick that up. We ask that you not read it during the presentations, but it's something you can take home. It's an attempt to summarize the conceptual plan and to make it as clear and simple as it can be presented. And I think after this evening's presentation, that will be extremely helpful. Just a few details should the need arise to evacuate this room, and we certainly hope that doesn't exist, but exits are there and to your right through the hallway, and the restrooms are also out there in the hallway to your right. We ask that you silence or turn off your cell phones. And I'll tell you now, the evening is recorded for future broadcast. So you might want to just remember that at times during the evening, unless you want to become infamous. And our panel for this evening consists of folks known to us, especially Selectman David Dunford and Selectman Alan McLennan. The third member of the panel is Mike Dominica, engineering consultant hired by the Selectmen to work with the advisory panel. Mike is the one who interfaced with the panel and Stantec engineering firm and led us through the maze of learning of the various technologies that could be considered for a conceptual plan. I told my wife after I came from the first panel meeting and the second, I said, it's like going to a graduate seminar and learning. There was such a level of learning, and Mike led us through that with the engineering firm. Our moderator for this evening is Orleans resident Sandra Marshall, to my right, now retired organization development consultant in strategic planning, team building, and conflict management, though we expect she will not have to use that skill tonight. She has worked with corporate, not-for-profit, and religious organizations and was trained at a program in Washington, D.C. known as the Alban Institute, and we share that together. So please welcome our panel and our moderator for the evening, and let us begin.
Great. Thanks, Doug. We got it. Okay. And good evening. The purpose of this evening is a conversation for all of us to learn, and I have still lots to learn about this whole project, to learn and become more informed about the conceptual plan to meet water quality in Orleans in preparation for our town meeting, which is a week from tonight. This is a learning forum in a conversation format. It's not an advocacy forum. If there are any need for debate or taking positions, that happens at town meeting, as we all know. And in order for us to benefit from our time together tonight and make the most out of it, we're going to have the following sort of guidelines and format for the evening. Each one of these men is going to speak in turn, and then questions and comments will come after the third speaker, which seems to give us plenty of time to think about what we want to talk about and what we want to say, and it doesn't interrupt the flow. So there are two parts. The first is the presentations, and the second is the Q&A time. And I'm going to ask our Selectman David Dunford to begin the evening with the background to the work that the panel has finished, including the whole process that began years ago. Mr. Dunford.
Well, thank you, Sandy. Hey, welcome everyone tonight. Thanks for coming out on what I think is our our first real day of spring that we've had. So it's great having you all here tonight. I think what the three of us going to try to do here is really to present the whole issue as it appeared chronologically over the last number of years. My role here is to really be more of the historian. I'm going to just mention a few remarks on the steps leading up to the stakeholders panel, the advisory panel, and the work, how we got to the work that has been accomplished over the last year, and this conceptual plan that is summarized on the flyer. Mike will follow with discussing the process and the output of the stakeholders panel, the studies conducted, and a little bit more on this consensus agreement. And I think my colleague Alan McLennan will discuss the warrant articles that are key a week from tonight. Are we going to be able to do it in one night, town meeting? I like this attitude. This is good. This is good. And where we expect the process to go from here. So, again, just very briefly, steps leading up to the stakeholders panel and the work done over the last year. Started way back when the Wastewater Management Steering Committee was formed by the Board of Selectmen in the year 2000. That was the Wastewater Management Steering Committee was the result of the approval of the long-range comprehensive plan by the town meeting that specified actions appropriate to look at the water quality in our estuaries and our waterways and our water bodies. Also concurrent at that time were efforts at the DEP on a state basis and the EPA nationally, but here in the state, to look at more closely the impairment of the bays and estuaries, and to start thinking about what was called the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, which was really measuring the nitrogen loads in our various seawater estuaries. So the Wastewater Management Steering Committee worked diligently over a number of years to look at the water quality issue and to come up with a recommendation as to how to proceed. That draft report was presented and approved at the town meeting in October 2008. The report at that time called for sewering on the order of 55% of the town with a centralized wastewater processing approach at a capital cost of some $150 million or so in 2008 dollars over time. The ensuing 2 to 3 plus years were really awaiting the completion of these Massachusetts estuary project studies, which looked at the Town Cove, Rock Harbor, Pleasant Bay, and looking at the nitrogen loads and what was necessary to potentially take out for water quality issues. So waiting for the results of the MEP studies, and also importantly waiting for the plan to be approved at the county commission, Cape Cod Commission level through the DRI process. And that was achieved in January 2011. The Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan was approved at that time. During the year 2012 and 2013, the Board of Selectmen worked on a first phase plan. I think maybe you all have memories of this. A first phase plan for implementation, with a result at a town meeting in May 2013. The so-called Phase 1A plan was presented, which called for conventional sewering all of downtown with treatment at the Tri-Town plant area, treatment of the septic. All at an eventual cost of some $35 million. This was presented at the town meetings in a split Board of Selectmen majority-minority board vote. It was marginally defeated at the May 2013 town meeting, and it was a little bit more significantly defeated at the June 2013 special town meeting. Why? Could have a lot of reasons, but mostly there were many reasons or questions that I think were voiced by people. One was the more specification of the affordability, the cost sharing, the actual impact of this work and project on the water quality, uncertainty on the effect on Nantucket Marsh with disposal of treated wastewater at that time from a Tri-Town located plant, the integration of the work being done at the county, the Section 208, the county work on looking at overall approach on a county-wide basis and the new technologies that were being developed there. Well, starting in July 2013, after those events, the Board of Selectmen took a step back, went back to square one. And we identified key questions in order to move forward together. And there were a number of questions. I think there were some 30 to 35 questions, key ones being, what's it look like if we sewer downtown and we have different approaches? Where are the underground utilities downtown that could impact how we lay pipes, whether they're large pipes, small pipes? We need to know the layout of the utilities in downtown. What about the Namscayket Marsh clay layer? How would that affect the water flow? The evaluation of decentralized and cluster treatment and disposal sites. There are a lot. Cedar Pond impacts on wastewater. The Tri-Town decommissioning costs and implications. The use of less expensive non-traditional technologies. There were a lot of questions. This led, after we hired, and I'm very pleased we did, Mike Dominica, I believe in November in 2013, to help us start getting our arms around these questions. This resulted in the Article 44 at the town meeting last year, which requested a little over $1 million to further our efforts in answering these questions so we could really build a consensus together and work together in solving this particular issue. And that article, again, looked at and asked for funds for this utility survey and mapping, for screening 25 to 30 sites in town for potential disposal of treated water or actual treatment plants, be it cluster systems of various sizes, looking at how appropriate some of these non-traditional technologies. And what do I mean by that? I'll let Mike get into that. I don't want to get too technical. But the non-sewering techniques of removing nitrogen that were coming out of the county effort. Looking at how appropriate these were for actual use in Orleans, so-called ground truthing the efforts. Looking at the Tri-Town plant, the market for the septage, and what we could or should do with it. And that's the only one that has a real time frame to it, because the permit at Tri-Town was ending, and also the intermunicipal agreement that we have with Eastham and Brewster had a termination date at the end of 2015. So that we had time constraint on. Look at, was there any issue on nitrogen with a plume from the landfill area? Looking at the integration of the entire efforts that the county made in terms of the integration of non-traditional technologies and how that would affect our proposed plan. That's where we were, and importantly, there were an effort was unanimously endorsed by the board to work on this, to present it through a stakeholders panel process, to work together, to have representatives from all the key areas in town work together with Mike and with a professional facilitator to work through these questions, work through some of the results of these studies that were funded a year ago in that article, and to come out with a consensus approach and effort. And there, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you very much, David. It's a good introduction and good background. And thank you all for coming and your attention and participation in this process. Just a couple of introductory comments. First, on that last point about participation, I look out in the audience and I see a number of people that have been to so many meetings and been engaged in this for so long, they could give this presentation probably better than I could. So I have to say, I've never been worked in a community, city, where there's been as much participation at all levels, from the technical level, financial level, communication level, interest in technologies, hands-on water quality sampling out in the field all the time. It's been an incredible testimony to the importance of this to the town of Orleans, and it's been great to participate in this over the last year and a half. The second comment is that this effort over the last really 2 years now is very, very challenging. This couldn't have been done 15 years ago, 20 years ago. The technology wasn't there. The data, the ability to take data and use it and analyze it wasn't there. There wasn't an understanding of the process to go through to go from a traditional plan, which was basically implemented all over the country for the last 100 years, to a very customized plan using non-traditional technologies such as we're investigating here. A lot of that is due to the impetus of the Cape Cod Commission 208 plan, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But this is very much an ice-breaking enterprise here that we're undertaking, trying to put together a plan that meets all of the criteria that David mentioned. There is a lot of complexity to this plan. I have an old car, a 64 Triumph. Sometimes it works. It has these 60-spoke wheels, and every time I look at them, I think of the Orleans. And what we're really doing is trying to put together the hub, and we have all of these spokes coming in, and they all have to come into this hub and fit together and work to make the thing roll and properly. There's so many pieces to this, and it's very complex. We'll go through some of them tonight. I think the plan is for me to give this presentation and then open it up for discussion and questions and wherever Sandy and others want to take it. So I'll start off with the goals of the planning process, which some of them are obvious, some aren't so obvious. I think it's just the right arrow button down in the bottom there, Matt. Yeah. And then go ahead, next one. Meet regulatory and water quality needs. This is driven primarily by the Clean Water Act. It's driven by, interestingly, parameters, nutrients, which aren't generally listed as water quality criteria in the Clean Water Act. They're nutrients that cause violations in other things like dissolved oxygen or benthic conditions or odor or other things. So right away we're starting with a challenge there dealing with nutrients, but it's to meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act as promulgated under DEP through total maximum daily loads, which tells you how much nitrogen you can put into a water body and have it be healthy. Next. Take advantage of the 208 planning of the Cape Cod Commission. 2 years ago, as a result of the CLF lawsuit that you've all heard about, know about, the Commission was asked to update the 1978 208 Water Quality Management Plan. That plan had sat there for 30 years. It's very interesting to read that plan. It envisions a lot of the things, very foresighted at the time. A lot of the things that are happening today were envisioned in that plan, especially with nutrients and non-point source pollutants. But the Commission took a big step forward in pulling together the science, the technologies from experience around the country, financial models and other things to allow the planning that we've done over the last year to be more focused. We'll get into that more in a minute. Retain the CWMP Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan regulatory approvals. There was a lot of work leading up to the 2010 plan and the 2013 votes. There was very, very excellent work done in laying a database, a foundation for understanding of the systems and the population, all of the details about Orleans. So we wanted to build on that. We also didn't want to go back to square one with regulatory approval with DEP and MEPA. So we wanted to take the shell of the plan and basically rebuild it, keeping those regulatory approvals such that we could move forward faster when we get to the right plan over the next year. So, next. Customize the plan to Orleans watersheds and land uses. This is a very substantial and significant point. The Orleans is very heterogeneous in terms of land use, from downtown to South Orleans to East Orleans to Rock Creek to Namskaket. Very, very different neighborhoods, different land uses. The plan really can't be one size fits all. And we realized that. It was actually realized during the CWMP, which is why there were 6 phases, and why they recognized that they're going to have to do some adaptive management as they went along. They didn't know quite what that was at the time, but that was envisioned. But it really needs to be customized to Orleans. Particular neighborhoods and different environmental conditions in Orleans. Develop an understanding for the potential of use of non-traditional technologies. We'll come back to that. These are promising technologies. They're emerging technologies. They're being used in certain applications, but there's not a lot of data out there on them. There's not a lot of real practical experience with them. It's not like designing a clarifier at a wastewater plant. You go out and pick up the book and it tells you how to do it. Don't have that information here. We're, again, breaking ice on a lot of this, which is the reason for the demonstration projects. Implement an affordable plan with costs shared according to value to customers. Affordability is critical, as Mr. Dunford indicated. That was probably the major issue in the CWMP done previously. The second part of this is the value to customers. When you have a downtown like this with the plan is to sewer, you have other parts of town without sewers, your traditional cost sharing doesn't work in this kind of setting. We really need a different financial structure to allocate costs to the appropriate value to each customer. And that's going to be a big challenge that we're undertaking over the next year, to figure out what the values are. And there's going to be a lot of public engagement on that, public perceptions on that as well. We need good data to build on. We also need a lot of engagement as we go through that. Go ahead. Next. We'll go through more quickly here. Use adaptive planning. Things are going to change. Change is part of the process here. We're going to have to keep adjusting as we go. Provide direction to the Tri-Town plant decision. Some critical decisions need to be made. We want to keep the market there. Keep that septage market and not have it go to other parts of the Cape. This is a significant revenue source, but the plant is running on fumes at right now. And how long can it go? And what does the cost curve look like over the next 4 years until we could get a new plant online? What is the cost that has to be put into maintaining that plant and keeping it running over that period? Is it flat or does it go steep? We're looking at that over the next year to try to determine that. Get the maximum benefit out of that plant. They call it running to failure in the business. And we don't want it to fail, but every penny you put into it 4 years from now could be a waste if we're building a new plant as well. Engineer an affordable plan paid for according to value. This plan is going to have to be engineered. It's really going to be customized, and we'll go through that in a lot of detail. Engage Orleans stakeholders directly in the process to build consensus. We've had tremendous engagement. I've never seen a Board of Selectmen commit to 2-week meetings as we have over the last 9 months, and stakeholders as well, and faithfully too. The attendance was phenomenal, and the engagement was phenomenal. And that has to continue. We can't continue with that intensity, and there's been some concern as to how do we maintain that, the understanding, the consensus, the communications that led to this consensus. As we go through the implementation, how do we maintain that? And there's been some good ideas talked about on how to do that, which we'll get into later. If I forget about it, bring it up during the question and answer. Okay. What do we have here? This is basically a timeline. You may have seen it. Let's just go through this quick, Matt. It's Matt, right? Go ahead and put the whole thing up there. We started on the left with basically, I can't read that from here, the MEP requirements. We went to the 208 plan. The 208 plan laid out, in the 208 framework that was done by the commission, they had a traditional technology solution that they ran through their models, and they had a non-traditional technology solution. And each technology solution, the non-traditional, solved the problem completely with non-traditional technologies. And when I say non-traditional technologies, I mean floating constructed wetlands, pretty much is what it is. It's a floating constructed wetland that sucks up nitrogen out of the water column below it. Coastal habitat restoration, which is the habitat related to shellfish and benthic organisms that makes shellfish and aquaculture successful. Aquaculture itself, not so much with regard to the habitat, but the commercial business. And then permeable reactive barriers, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Maybe we won't, I'll just cover it now. If you don't know what a PRB is, they're being used in various parts of the country in various settings, usually for hazardous waste type situations. We're now looking at it in a case for nitrogen and phosphorus. There's one for phosphorus being used on MMR for a phosphorus plume to Ashumet Pond. It's worked very well for about 15 years. We're looking at using those. They're subsurface barriers that the groundwater flows through, and it uses wood chips or other organic matter to remove nitrogen, turns nitrate into nitrogen gas. They can be very, very effective. The good thing about them is that if they're designed properly and work properly, placed at the right place closer to the water body, they can get improvements in the water body much faster than building sewers further upstream or other types of controls. But those were the non-traditional technologies. We then went and said, okay, let's, for Orleans, construct what we call bookends, which we took the Cape Cod Commission non-traditional and traditional and customized it to Orleans, because they were generic. They were just generic technology. We customized traditional, non-traditional for Orleans. We did a number of technical studies to look at how those would work. Then we put together a hybrid plan out there, hybrid plan number 1. And then we put together the financial model that was to be used to test the cost options with regard to that hybrid plan. Through the number of stakeholder workshops, we'd come back and modify that hybrid plan. I think we're in the 3rd or 4th version at the end, what we ended up with. We have a plan that is customized, again, uses the non-traditional technologies. It uses, let's go to the next slide there, Matt. It uses the non-traditional technologies in all parts of town except downtown area, which, as you can see on the maps, there's a map back there and another one over here. The colored shaded areas are where we would use traditional collection and treatment systems. Every other part of town would use non-traditional technologies, those 4 that I mentioned. So that was the plan that we came up with. Parallel projects to integrate along the way. As Mr. Dunford mentioned, the utility survey is almost done now. That provides the basis for looking at the collection system in detail in terms of what's in the streets and where we have to pump, where the pressure sewers would work or other things. Landfill plume assessment, we did an analysis of that. There is a nitrate plume from the landfill. We need to figure out where it's coming from. It's not dangerous to public health at all. It's a water quality issue. That's the only point there. But it is nitrate, and it is a significant source, whether it's from the composting pile, the old lagoons that are at the landfill that were abandoned about 20 years ago but still have a heavy organic load on subsurface, or the landfill itself needs to be determined. But if we use a PRB downstream of the landfill, we could get double benefit from removing not only the ambient nitrogen that's in the groundwater outside of the landfill, but also that plume coming from the landfill. And again, that could be a very efficient way of doing that, and that's why we backed off proposing, at least during the first phases, collection and treatment around the southeast part of Town Cove. Originally, that was planned for collection and treatment as well because of the density and the nitrate load to Town Cove. But if we can do it with a PRB, that would be less expensive and effective, probably faster with regard to improvement of water quality. aquaculture survey and case studies, Namskakit Marsh restoration. Namskakit Marsh isn't nitrogen limited, but in the forum we had, a workshop we had in fall, we identified some critical things that need to be done in Namskakit. The vegetation survey done 6, 7, 8 years ago is being updated to look at the effects of changes in the vegetation in Namskakit Marsh to see what is causing that, especially upstream of the culvert. There's been serious deterioration of the environmental conditions upstream of the culvert. You see it in the vegetation. If you walk the bike path, look to your left as you go west, you'll see it. Also the 6A area, stormwater management in the 6A area around Ellis Pond, and also linking with the RESET program, which is a study of the best land uses of the 6A area there, to look at restoring that whole area, not just putting money into stormwater management, but looking at what that future area could be used for environmentally, and then looking at the water resources and water quality aspects of it in conjunction with that. Other things that are to look at the culvert. The culvert looks like it might be constraining flow, saltwater flow to the upper part of Namskakit Marsh upstream of the bike path, which could be the cause of the deterioration in the vegetation there, the Phragmites that you see. So we're going to look at the hydraulics of that culvert and the operation of it, because it may be being used for flood control as opposed to in lieu of recharge, saltwater recharge of that marsh upstream. There's competing interests at that culvert. Rock Creek Harbor, aquaculture survey and case studies looking at what's already going on in Orleans with regard to aquaculture. There's serious aquaculture already going on. The growers have a lot of experience here. There's a forum coming up on June 8th to look at this in a lot more detail. It's got a great panel, including a number of the growers with grants in Orleans, and that's going to give us direction on the aquaculture demonstration projects that we're going to be put in place. Rock Creek Harbor, Cedar Pond, you know the issues there with the cormorants, but also we have an issue with the flashboards there, in or out, salt or fresh, and how that works out both water quality-wise, but also with regard to regulatory issues as well. And then the Tri-Town plant and permit timeline. This is, I won't just go through this quick map. This is the timeline, which if you have any questions on, we can go through it afterwards. It lays out the decisions that have to be made with regard to the Tri-Town plant. There was a meeting of the joint boards of the 3 towns a couple of weeks ago talking about this issue. There's a couple of more dots there, Matt. I think we need to push. There we go. You can go back. Yeah, that meeting number 2 was just held early next year, or this fall, or early next year. There has to be another meeting of the joint boards with more information on the plant and how it's surviving and what the options are as we see coming out of this with regard to the maintaining that plant and confirming whether we can find a site for disposal from a new plant there, which is a key issue we'll get to in a minute. So that's just a copy of the map. This is a summary of the costs, and I don't want to go into it in detail, but if you look at the conceptual hybrid plan on the left and the CWMP on the right, you can see if you add up the traditional and non-traditional, we're talking about 107 million versus 183 for the CWMP, which used pretty much just traditional technologies. If all 6 phases had been built using traditional technologies, which probably wouldn't have happened anyway, but nevertheless, there's significant cost savings already. O&M cost, you'll see if you add up the 2 left columns, the 22 million 40, you get 62. So O&M, annual O&M and overall O&M is higher, because right now, as we look at the non-traditional technologies, operation and maintenance of them is complex. they're not off-the-shelf type things. They take a lot of attention. Aquaculture, if you're not right on top of it, if you're not watching the details of it, can go south very quickly. Floating constructed wetlands, you need to monitor upstream, downstream. There's a lot of operation and maintenance with these types of systems. So the operation cost is high. However, that's what we're using now because there's not much data. We're presuming conservative operation costs based on not knowing what these do. If they work 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the O&M costs for the non-traditional technology should be a fraction of what's shown there. So those will come down over time as we get the experience with those technologies, know that they work, know how to maintain them, and don't have to monitor them as much. Overall, the significant cost savings, you can see the percent nitrogen reduction. We're getting 32% from traditional, 68% from non-traditional, as opposed to 100% really from traditional over the CWMP. Keep in mind, though, that 68% for non-traditional is speculative. It's not proven. That's why we have the demonstration projects and have to work on those to get them, design them properly, see if they work. If they work, there's a big upside. If they don't, we'll come to that later. Other things down below, you see the difference in the amount of property sewered and the percent of property sewered. Warrant article status, you will see these in the warrant article if you already haven't. Treatment disposal site investigations, those are very important, particularly finding a new site for the discharge from a new plant at the Tri-Town site. We want to get the water discharge out of Namskakit, but it's going to be a challenge finding a new site. We think we have some good options at the Cloverleaf at 6 and 6A. There's precedent for using that Cloverleaf. Provincetown used the Cloverleaf, not the Cloverleaf, but the median strip between the north and southbound lanes there for their disposal site. It's a DOT property. We've already started discussions with DOT to see if they would allow Orleans to use that. It would be hopefully very inexpensive as well. Instead of acquiring a new site, DOT, in the case of Provincetown, is willing to give it away. They don't want to maintain it, but they're willing to negotiate. But it's not going to be an easy negotiation. It's not something that is a slam dunk there. Demonstration project planning and permitting. We'll probably have 3 or 4 demonstration projects this year that will go through planning and design. I suspect that we probably won't have one constructed and operating by the end of FY16. It's possible. It would be something like a floating constructed wetland, something that doesn't need a permit. A PRB is going to have a permit requirement to it. Floating constructed wetland, if we can get the right sites and all those issues, is a possibility. Aquaculture is another possibility. It's low upfront capital cost, relatively low. There's some good opportunities there, but it's again getting Department of Marine Fisheries and other groups lined up and coordinated to do that. Facilities planning, a lot of detail needs to go into the downtown system. There's systems down there that may be usable for another 10 or 15 years. We need to have a lot of information on those systems. We need a lot of information on the land use potential down there according to existing zoning, which is another article that Mr. McLennan will talk about. Tri-town transition requirements we've mentioned. Let's go on there, Matt. Regulatory coordination, a lot of regulatory coordination at 2 levels. The overall program level in meeting TMDLs for Nauset Harbor, Nauset Marsh, Pleasant Bay, Rock Creek Harbor, but also Rock Harbor Creek, but also at the demonstration project level. There's going to be serious attention to the demonstration projects. The key challenge is getting DEP to agree that these things can be permitted as long-term compliance measures. DEP is not the most agile regulatory agency. They tend to be very, very traditional, very conservative. They're talking about being a new day, a new way of looking at things, but the proof is in the pudding. Will they really permit aquaculture as compliance in TMDL? We have to prove it for them to come on board. Probably there'll be some interim permits and other types of innovative regulatory approaches to permitting these projects for an interim period to see if they work. Water quality monitoring is key. It's already going on here, as you know very well, but we have to make sure it's integrated and meets all of the needs. And one of the needs is eventually the update of the MEP model to look at different conditions, both hydrodynamic conditions, which is how water moves physically up and down vertically in the column, and the shoaling and the breaks and the mixing, dilution, and other factors, but also the water quality, which we need to get data sets and make sure we have the right information to confirm the nitrogen requirements there. But just a side point, it's important to note that this isn't something new. Nitrogen from Maine to the mid-Atlantic, from the Chesapeake Bay to Maine, is recognized for 30 years now as a major contributor to eutrophication in saltwater and freshwater systems. You drive around Massachusetts, you see the freshwater systems. You drive around up and down the East Coast, you'll see the water quality conditions in saltwater. It's nitrogen driven, especially on the Cape because of the growth. If you look at the growth curve over the last 40 years in Orleans, on-site systems were fine in the 50s and 60s. We've passed that now. We're putting so much nitrogen in the ground, it's finally migrated. It takes years to migrate it. It's migrated to where it's affecting the closed embayments especially, but even the open waters in some cases. This is not rocket science. It's not something that is new information. It's been around a long time. There's been a lot of work done in understanding it, modeling it, and being able to control it. So this is a major task going forward. It's going to take a couple of 3 years to get everything together to make sure we have the right information to be able to model the alternatives we're putting together and make sure we're doing the right thing. It has to be a long-term focus as well. Namskakit Marsh Protection, we talked about that. We just go on there. Cedar Pond we talked about, and financial analysis is a major issue. We have a lot of knobs to turn on the financial radio, so to speak, to get the right balance. The financial drivers will be cost allocation. There'll be external drivers like 0% interest. A big driver is getting 0% interest in the state. That's a very substantial savings. Maintaining the septage revenue. The septage revenue, if we build septage as part of a new facility, the operation and maintenance and capital cost is a fraction of what it is if we built it by itself, economies of scale. So the septage revenue, if we can keep it, pays for something like 50 to 75% of the operating cost of the plant, just in the net septage revenue over the costs. So to keep that market is very critical. That helps us drive down the customer costs. Grants are another very important factor. Chatham system was built on a substantial grant from USDA through the Rural Development Administration. The 208 plan was predicated on the fact that somewhere at the state, federal level, there had to be substantial equity commitment by the state and federal government, somewhere between 25 and 50%, to make these kinds of systems affordable on the Cape. We need to push that at all levels over the next few years. Major factor there. There's other and then how these all mix together and how we stage the projects and implement the projects is a big factor in making it affordable. It can be made affordable. Towns do this, and it is affordable. It's a big investment, but the water system was a big investment. Towns make these investments. This is very critical going forward. Is there another one there? Public involvement we've talked about. We'll talk more about that as we go forward. Here's a schedule over the next year. basically in terms of the priorities. I won't go through this in detail. It includes all of the things we just talked about. This is a simplified schedule. The detailed schedule, you couldn't read the font on it because it's a lot of activities. Every one of these has a more detailed schedule in terms of what has to happen, when it has to happen, and how it feeds into the other lines on that drawing as well. So, next, Matt. Key issues: can Orleans find an alternative disposal site for the downtown plant? That's a very key issue. Next, can suitable sites for treatment disposal for Meeting House Pond wastewater be permitted and acquired? Critical issue. Are debt forgiveness or grants going to be available for funding? Next, can existing septic facility run until the new one? Next, key issues for non-traditional technologies. Can they be designed to work? Good potential. The devil's in the details. They're very, very site-specific. So what works in one part of town may not work in another. What works in one part of town may not work right away. We may need to tweak it. We may need to learn from one year and then the next year tweak it and make sure it and customize it in some other way, redesign it so that it does work. Once it does work there, we try it in someplace else and hopefully build a pyramid there of these technologies, which also fit the character of the sub-watersheds, the less dense, more rural, more environmentally sensitive watersheds in Orleans. These technologies, it would be great benefit to the town if they work there, to have aquaculture, to have green infrastructure, as opposed to a big plant and the issues related to that. But there's a challenge there. Can they be maintained to be reliable? Reliability is really the DEP issue. They don't doubt that you can build something to work. What they really doubt is that you'll be able to maintain it such that it's reliable and it meets the standard every year. The Clean Water Act doesn't allow you to meet the standard one year and not the next. It's all the time, everywhere, under any condition. That's the regulatory requirement of the Clean Water Act. So that's a big concern here. Can acceptable sites be found? They sound good, but PRBs have issues when you construct them. They have issues in the operation and maintenance of them. Floating constructed wetlands are wonderful things. If you were in Roxbury, to have a floating constructed wetland would be great. When you're in Aries Pond, to have a floating constructed wetland right in front of your dock or near the entrance to the pond or something is a different situation. They're not always desirable. So that's a question with regard to siting. The siting is not only abutter preferences, but it's also hydraulic and water quality as well. They have to be put in the right part of the water body to where they work. So the siting is going to be a challenge on these. We're going to have some significant siting criteria as we go through this, and a lot of stakeholder involvement in that as well. Can they be permitted for long-term compliance? How much can Orleans save if yes to the above? Could be substantial, would be substantial. And lastly, what if they don't work? That's a significant question. The DEP rep to the stakeholder workshops several times kept asking us, what's plan B? And Alan and I met with the state revolving fund representatives a few weeks ago, and they don't have a protocol for funding a project that doesn't work. If they fund a project that doesn't work, zero interest loan, and you come back in 5 years and say, well, it didn't work, we need more money. They don't have a protocol for that. It's not a state revolving fund in that sense. So that's going to be a challenge. But that's what we're looking at the next year. The upside is, could be very, very good financially and environmentally. Realistic, we have to be realistic, and we need to do our homework. We need to get good technical experts involved. There needs to be a lot of stakeholder engagement in this. We're looking at the technical committees. We're going to evolve more from a policy and planning type of stakeholder engagement, more to a focused on demonstration projects and technologies and siting and different issues like that over the next year. Really get into the details. So with that, I took too much time,
Okay.
but
Let me pick it up. Thank you, Mike. In my spare time between meetings, I'm reading a wonderful book called Dirty Old London, and it's about the installation of a sewer system in London in 1851. And I can't help but think that in 1951, 100 years later, the town of Orleans instituted the systems that used to be used in London, sewage lagoons and pits. And that's the way we dealt with this issue. And now, probably 70 years later, 2020, if all goes well, as Mike has explained, we will come into the 21st century. So, the warrant, which you've all received, I suspect, in the mail, if not, pick it up at the town hall, is 114 pages long this year. And there are 70 articles in the annual and the special town meeting. It's long because the Board of Selectmen this year decided to put the actual motion that you would be voting on in the warrant. Traditionally, it was warrant, report, how did the Finance Committee report, how did the Board of Selectmen feel about it, and then one of the members of the Board of Selectmen would come up and read something that you didn't have in front of you. Now you have it in front of you. As of last week, read it because you're going to be quizzed next Monday at about 6:30. There are 70 articles, as I've said. 10 are in the special town meeting, 60 are in the annual. There are 5 articles that relate to what Mike and Dave has just talked about. When we convene at 6:30 next Monday, we'll go through the opening ceremonies, and then we will immediately go into the special town meeting. And Article 8 in the special town meeting, which says Fund Orleans Town Center Planning Study. And most of you will say, why is that a wastewater project? And I'm going to tell you exactly why it is, and Mike has also. We are eligible, if we pass one more step, to receive, apply for, and hopefully receive zero interest loans. This is a critical part of the long-range financial plan. If you look at just phase 1 of the traditional system, which might be $30 to $35 million based on 3 different studies over the last 8 years, we would save $21 million in interest fees if we qualify. Very quickly, we qualify because, as Mike has said, we're trying to remove nutrient loading, which is destroying our water bodies. 2, we are not currently under any enforcement order, like Chatham was a few years ago. We have a comprehensive wastewater management plan, which the voters in this town voted at a special town meeting in October 2008. And we have participated with the Cape Cod Commission, and our planning process is consistent with the Regional Water Resources Plan. The one thing we don't have, and we need to get through Article 8, is a clear understanding of what will happen in our downtown area when we sewer it. There are many properties there today that cannot expand to what the voters gave them when they adopted the zoning bylaw. And what the zero interest loan program says, we will fund you at zero interest if you can prove that you will not have unmitigated development above and beyond the controls that were in effect, in our case, January 28th, 2011. The downtown planning study is allowing us to prove that we qualify for that 5th important item. And What it will also do, and both David and Mike have talked about finance, it will allow us to figure out what the economic benefit accrues to what property owners downtown, and therefore, how should we charge them for the betterment that we're giving them? So they will pay for the benefit they get. And the classic example here, which was all done privately, is Shaw's. Shaw's existed, Skakit Corners existed for a long time, and then they wanted to expand. And in order to expand, they had to pay for and install a new innovative alternative septic treatment system. And then the Cape Cod Commission allowed them to expand and have more development. So that's critical. Article 8, first one, hopefully that gets us rolling very quickly. Article 3 is the capital plan. I'm not going to spend any time on it, but take a look at it in your warrant because it explains how this wastewater management plan will be funded over the next 5 years. This is a requirement of our charter. We must tell you where we're headed, not only in 1 year, but in 5 years. The next critical article is Article 5, and that's everything that Mike has talked about. It's somewhat unique in Orleans. By my calculation, the voters of Orleans have acted on wastewater planning issues 28 times since the year 2000. So unlike some other communities that go out and appropriate a big chunk of money and then committees go off and do the work, we seem to be more participatory here. And through the Orleans Water Quality Advisory Panel, some of you have heard me say, I added it up. In 12 meetings, we had 2,500 person hours sitting there participating. And that's why we succeeded. It's absolutely critical. So warrant Article 5, that will fund exactly what Mike has described to you. Warrant Article 33 in the annual is a petition to the state legislature to allow us or to have them tell the State Department of Transportation, be friendly with the town of Orleans and let them use the 6 acres that are on the southeast corner of that interchange. And when you come off, coming into Orleans from Boston, it is the land that's on the hill to the left. It's 6 acres there, and it's in the Little Nantucket watershed, which will work for us. Article 35 is another, a little pressure point. Many of you, I'm sure, read in the paper a couple of weeks ago, we've been trying to meet with NSTAR, now known as Eversource, to talk about Cedar Pond. Frankly, we were stood up a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people had assembled, and at 10 minutes to 10, I happened to be in the planning office, and somebody called and said, is there a meeting there today? Oh, yes, there is, at 10 o'clock. He said, oh my gosh, I have a mistake in my calendar. I can't be there. Well, we're going to petition the legislature and have the legislature help us deal with that power company. The other critical one is Article 54. Our charter has a very constricted procedure for intermunicipal agreements. And we have lost grants in the past because the Board of Selectmen has not been empowered to make a contract with another governmental agency. Last year, we asked permission of the town meeting. We received it in a unanimous vote to allow us to work with the Cape Cod Commission to test a permeable reactive barrier, PRB. And it was very specific. The money was appropriated last summer by the state in the infrastructure bill, and we believe that this coming year, the Cape Cod Commission will have money to try these pilots. So we want to be ready, and Article 54 will allow to have intermunicipal agreements with aquaculture, floating constructed wetlands, and habitat restoration projects. So the 4 critical non-traditional approaches that we have in this plan, if you agree, under Article 54, will be able to allow us to negotiate directly with governmental agencies to try them out here in Orleans. There is one other article that may be confusing, not submitted by the Board of Selectmen or the Finance Committee. It is Article 58, and it talks about funding a marine study of Nauset Estuary. That has been submitted by petition. It's a little unclear exactly what is proposed. There's been talk about special maintenance dredging and some other things. The fact is that about $75,000 of the $1 million that Mike has talked about will be dealing with Nauset Estuary to figure out how we can improve the water quality in Nauset Estuary. And already, the Cape Cod National Seashore has funded a major project handled by the Center for Coastal Studies, formerly known as the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies. And we already have extensive bathymetric information on all of Nauset Estuary, and we also have sediment samples. And that information will be be publicized later this year. So much of the work that is being requested for the $50,000 in Article 58 is already planned in the work that we have and has been done by the Center for Coastal Studies for the Cape Cod National Seashore, which controls about 80% of the Nauset Estuary, if you look at the boundary line. So those are the key warrant articles that I wanted to talk about. They are critical, and the thing I want you to remember is, again, just to emphasize, we have a tradition in Orleans where we ask permission to take a step. We take that step, we report back to you, the voters, and then we ask permission to take the next step. And that's what we're doing here, and we hope that you will support us as we move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. And now the floor is open for questions. I'm going to ask you to, if you can, to stand so I can see you and direct your question to me, and then I will ask the panelists which one of them wants to answer it. How's that?
Sounds good.
Are these crucial articles going to be bundled together somehow so that people don't pass half of them and not the other half or something? This is quite complicated. I'm worried about all the people who aren't here that don't know any of this.
Who would like to answer that?
You're the article.
Well,
Alan?
let me answer it. The warrant is published and fixed, and so they come in the order that I gave you. There's a pattern in our warrants. However, there is a procedure which I've seen used once in my 10 years, I guess, here, where you can take something out of order. But I think if you think about it, special town meeting, warrant Article 8 is the key thing. If we pass warrant Article 8, we move immediately into the annual, and we go to 3 and 5, and those are critical. Those are the key money articles. 33, 35, and 54 are not money articles. They are procedural articles. And so they only require a majority vote instead of a two-thirds vote. I might say that having spent a lot of time working with the Charter Review Committee, if we vote the right charter changes this year and the State Attorney General approves them, within the next year or year and a half, we will be able to make significant changes to this warrant so that we can do just what you want. We can't do it quite yet. But keep raising the question because we want to change the process.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the work everyone's done on this,
Yes, sir.
both the panel as well as the selectmen for all the hours you put into getting us to this point. I'm very positive with where we are today. Whoever might want to answer this question, it's a two-part question. To ensure the success of this moving forward, what do you see the one element that will keep this moving? And looking at the other side of the coin, what's the biggest threat to this not going forward?
Gentlemen?
Perhaps I can start out with that, Kevin. Thank you. I think the biggest element of success is, I would call it transparency as to what we're doing. This is a very complicated issue, as everybody has rightly observed here. And so I think the most important feature on the positive and negative side is transparency. How do you gain transparency? You have this stakeholders process. It's a communication issue. I think it's nice when one hypothesizes something and it really turns out right. And that was this stakeholders panel this year. It achieved this good bringing collaboration, moving forward, bringing it together, and being very transparent about it. This sort of thing will continue in a slightly modified form, either through a stakeholders panel continuing a little less frequently, because you and I have a lot of different things to do, Kevin, than the frequency we had to go to this. But also some more detailed written reports and communications with the Board of Selectmen on a monthly basis, which will be totally transparent. That's the key to success or failure, is collaboration and transparency. We're either all going to do it together and we understand where we're going, or we're not going to make it.
Thank you,
Could I
Mr.
just-
Dunford. Alan?
Yeah, just add something else. I talked about legislation that was passed last summer, which provided money for these non-traditional technologies. It also changed the zero interest loan program. It used to be that that program was going to sunset in 2019, which put incredible pressure on people to proceed. They extended that for 50 years, so it now goes out for 2069. The second thing that they did was they said, we will now finance these projects not over 20 years, but over 30. And the third major breakthrough, not many words in a pretty big complicated piece of legislation, but there is a way now for loan forgiveness. So there is a way that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, through this loan program, can forgive 25% of the loan. So let's just take something simple. Let's say $30 million for Phase 1 downtown and everything relating to it. 30 million, 30 years, zero interest is only $1 million a year to pay back. And you save $21 million. If you got 25% loan forgiveness over that 30 years and you only had to pay back $22,500, I think, if my math is correct, you reduce the annual payment even more. So it is absolutely critical that we figure out a way to reduce the capital costs in this program, which is going to run out through our grandchildren's years or more, to reduce it to the point where we are paying about 50% of the known capital cost. That's reduction in interest and grants. And I personally believe, having spent a lifetime in this business, gray hair is, yep, it's there, 50 years. But when you're in a position like the town of Orleans on Cape Cod, where the Cape Cod Commission has just done the most far-reaching study of how we deal with solving our wastewater problems, there is a strong possibility that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the federal government will begin to say, we've got to help those communities solve their wastewater problem. Because if we don't solve it here on Cape Cod, there is no economy anymore. It's gone, because our economy is our environment. And when the word gets out that so-and-so pond is green, guess what happens to the property values? That's what we've got to watch out for. And with the internet, it ripples all over the United States, and all of a sudden, rentals don't come in anymore. We need to make sure that we clean this up, but we've got to do it in a cost-effective way, and we've got to work hard to make that happen. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. McLennan. Would you raise your hand if you need the microphone, please? Thank you.
Good evening. Also, following Kevin, thank you for getting to a 5-0-0 position. I think the most critical thing coming up, and I appreciate your opinions for the two selectmen, is full support, active by the town leaders at this upcoming annual town meeting. A lot of people who aren't here, most of the people aren't here tonight. I think you all have got to speak out positively, enthusiastically for this thing, even though there's no real cost yet, which I think David identified as a critical absent item last time, which, by the way, had more than 50% of the town voting in favor. You said it got defeated, Dave. That was right. But more than 50% of the town, in both cases, annual meeting and at the moot ballot, more than 50% voted for getting started. And that's what I want to see. So if one of you could just answer, how is the Board of Selectmen going to pitch the issue? and that's a positive pitch. And secondly, a question for whoever. Article 3, which I think is the capital investment plan, it doesn't appear to me that in there it's an indication of simple majority or two-thirds. I'm scared of this two-thirds votes. You know, no towns on the Cape have gotten to two-thirds in most of these situations. So, one, how's the Board of Selectmen going to really sell this program a week from tonight? And secondly, what is the requirement on the capital investment plan? Thank you.
Mr. Dunford, Mr. McLennan?
Sure. I'll start out on that. The requirement on the capital improvement plan, as indicated in the warrant on Article 3, is a simple majority. It is not a two-thirds. The capital improvement plan, importantly to recognize, is not, in and of itself, it does not raise money. That's why it is not two-thirds. It is a plan, and it is our best shot at a plan that will be managed going forward. So in terms of, you know, what's the Board of Selectmen doing? Just this, working with the stakeholders panel. The best way that one can have an informed decision at a town meeting is to inform everybody as much as possible. And these kinds of forums and other forums that have been in place, Jim, are, I think, the best tack. Now, on town meeting night, which is actually, it might almost be exactly a week from now, where this conversation could be occurring. I will be the one. I've assigned myself to present this article to a town meeting. I remember I did the Article 44 a year ago, and I had two versions. I had the quick version, I had the long version. The sense of the town meeting was, let's do the quick version, which was good. The question at that point, I don't see, during my presentation, Jim, I don't see giving an hour presentation on all this. I think it's a preparation up to that point, which is the key. And it's these conversations, it's these flyers that I think were very well done, factually objective base as to what we've got going on. I believe that's going to be mailed out to every household, voting household here in the town. And of course, noting and very much making visible the fact that, and I'll just talk about Article 5, but we have all those wastewater articles, 500 from the Board of Selectmen, 900 from the Finance Committee. The town elected and appointed leadership is all for this.
Thank you.
Sandy, just to follow up, if I could, for a minute.
Yes, Alan.
David has 5. I have 8 in the special, and I have 33, which is exit 12 use, 35, which is Cormorants and Cedar Pond, and I have 54, the alternative technology. So you have already heard what I'm going to say. I don't, if we get into, 33, 35, and 54, and we're doing this properly, we may not need a lot of big PowerPoint presentations, hopefully.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to bring one with me, just so you know.
Yes, sir.
Well, since everyone's lobbing softballs, I'll change the tone here a little. My concern is about increase in development in the downtown area that will be able to result from the sewer system going into the downtown area. And as Alan said earlier, we are committing to not building beyond our zoning, but our zoning allows very substantial increase in the density of the downtown area. With all the buildings going to 2 stories, if I understand it correctly, they could go to 2 stories if they were able to. And the only thing keeping them from expanding many of the places that have a lot of property is that they can't because of the sewering, because they can't build a septic. They don't want to put in their own cluster system because that's more expensive. But if the taxpayers subsidize that, that's fine. So the issue is, have you considered the impact on traffic? Have you considered the impact on parking downtown? And have you considered the impact on our water supply, since we already have an issue with showers in the summertime? We're all asked not to shower between 4:30 and 6 or whatever the time is because we don't have pressure in the water system. Yeah,
I
at
think-
home.
Sir, do you have a question?
I think
Would you-
that-
Yeah, the question is, have we considered the impact on traffic,
Thank you.
on parking, and on our water supply? Because we have to provide water if there's an increased intensity.
Mr. Dunford.
Actually, I think I may lateral that off to Alan, since he's the man on the.
Okay, sorry, I didn't-
That's all right, no problem. On the downtown study plan, which is the Article 8 in the special town meeting. So, Alan?
So the answer is, have we considered and will we consider? The answer is yes. The way that I have looked at this as a planner is that on 5 separate occasions in the last 15 years, the voters of the town of Orleans have said you can do the following things in downtown. And every one of those changes required a 2/3 vote, and it was explained to town meeting what might happen. So in order to qualify, we have to make sure that we don't exceed that. One of the things that is going on, this is a partnership now with the Cape Cod Commission. And actually, the $150,000 is being augmented by about $75,000 from the Cape Cod Commission, where they are currently going through and looking at every parcel of land in the downtown area to try and figure out what one could do with that parcel under existing zoning and projected zoning. I believe that this planning process will also take a hard look at what we can do for traffic, and parking, of course, is a requirement of the individual developer, not the town right now. So that's an economic issue that has to be looked at. And one of my thoughts is, in this process, if I get involved more than I am, is that we ought to really use a little bit of this money to hire a retired developer, not one who's in it to make money, but to say, if I were looking at the town of Orleans and I were capped with the following zoning and I were going to get wastewater, how would I look at all these different parcels to see what can be done under the existing zoning? Because we really don't know right now. And this process will help us understand that, and it's possible we might want to amend our zoning bylaw to prevent things from happening that you were talking about.
Thank you. I would encourage you to amend the zoning bylaws.
Other questions or comments? My goodness, yes.
What happens if these things fail, these these new alternative approaches, and we put them in because in good faith we think they're okay, that they're going to be successful, and 5 years from now we discover that they're not, or even 2 years we discover that they're not? Who pays for that kind of problem? Anybody?
Who, Mike?
You got it, Mike.
One thing I think will be coming out of this is that the regulatory drivers from the Commission to the DEP to EPA in this direction are going to require them to revisit their financing procedures and criteria in the future. They can't promote this type of technology without putting in a regulatory structure that can permit it, fund it, especially the research and development. Back in the 1970s, when the Clean Water Act was promulgated, 1972, EPA had a very, very substantial research and development effort that went along for about 15 years, where it put in place and demonstrated all the technologies that the communities can pick up. That's not there now, and the regulators realize that, and they're going to have to address this. And when we met with the SRF people downtown, they were thinking, how are we going to do this? That's going to have to change. The other thing is that there is a risk. If something doesn't work, that there's one of the aspects of the success of this going forward, that's one the other gentleman asked, is I think perseverance. It's going to have to, when something doesn't work, it's going to have to, you have to look at it and say, how can we make it work? How does this need to be tailored or redesigned to make it work? We're going to have to then look at it again and say, well, what's the cost of that, and what's the risk if that doesn't fail? At the end of the day, the traditional technologies may have to be used in certain parts of town. The regulations on clean water and water quality standards don't go away, and for good reason. So they're going to have to meet water quality standards, and it could be going back to traditional technologies in certain areas. Traditional technologies are also advancing, though. Cluster systems in wastewater plants aren't what they used to be. The technology is changing. Smaller footprints, more efficient, less expensive. So we have that benefit as well with regard to time. The other thing is phasing. I think a big part of this, the CWMP that originally came out looked at it. This is the cost of it. It didn't look at the phasing of it over 30 years and implementing it in a phased method like that. So I think all of those things need to be considered, and they won't all succeed immediately, but we'll learn as we go.
Thank you, Mr. Dominic. Yes, sir.
Are some of the experimental techniques also very low cost, therefore rather low risk? For example, putting a shellfish bed is not a very high cost item, and I believe some of the others as well are very low cost. Is that
exactly? That's exactly right, and that's one of the potential upsides here. Jim Robertson was telling me before the meeting tonight the success that they've been seeing in shellfish in Orleans very recently, and you know, that's a very definite potential technology going forward.
And a follow-up question is, since we've already done this in Lonnie's Pond, does that count as, I know that DEP is very fussy about, unless they took the measurements, it doesn't count as experience in that quote, technology.
I think that it's not so much whether DEP took the measurements or not, was that done before the MEP evaluation of the nitrogen load? If it was done before that, then it wouldn't count. If it was done after that, it would.
Are there any more questions for the three panelists? You have all week to think about them for their town meeting.
A week.
Okay. No questions a week from tonight, all right? I want to have a nice,
No, that's
easy-
not fair. We have lots to study.
Well, again, we thank you for coming out tonight. We hope it's been informative. A lot of information. You can certainly understand the complexity. The years when David said, beginning back in 2000, and here we are, 2015. But join me in thanking the panel and our moderator. We promised you we'd end at 8:30. I have 2 minutes, and I'm going to use them. We talked about the years, the months, the hours. Alan talked about the 2,500 person hours that were put in this past year by the advisory panel members and so forth. In the Greek language, there's a word called kairos, and I love that word. It's in contrast to chronos, which is the other Greek word for time, but that is chronological time. It's time you measure. It's hours, it's weeks, it's days, it's months, it's years. We've seen that kind of time in the 15 years that volunteers and others have worked on this whole issue, trying to address it for the town of Orleans. It seems to me we're at Kairos right now. Kairos is defined time of opportunity. Next Monday night is Kairos time. time of opportunity. I hope we as citizens of Orleans will use that time well next Monday night. So thank you. Safe travel home. See you next Monday night.